Every mystery has a voice. Few dare to listen.
They possess long corridors in which footsteps acquire an alarming importance, staircases which creak only beneath innocent feet, windows too narrow for a respectable burglar and too large for a respectable draught, and carpets of such antiquity that one hesitates to disturb them for fear of discovering either a corpse or the reign of Queen Victoria underneath. Ashcombe Hall was such a house. It stood 3 miles beyond the village of Belminster, surrounded by yew trees, wet lawns, and the sort of shrubbery which encouraged young ladies to write poetry and older ladies to conceal their disappointments. The house itself was grey, square, and faintly disapproving. Its windows reflected the sky with the blankness of spectacles belonging to a retired schoolmaster. On a November afternoon, Lord Peter Wimsey arrived there in a motor car which had developed, during the last 10 miles, a personal objection to hills. "Really, Bunter," he remarked as he stepped onto the gravel, "if the machine intends to expire, I wish it would select a more suitable occasion. One cannot investigate murder while being defeated by a carburetor." Bunter, his valet, regarded the house. "It looks damp, my lord." "It does. A house like this is usually either a leak or a secret, sometimes both." They had not been invited to Ashcombe Hall for luncheon. That was the first interesting fact. The second was that nobody had actually said the word murder in the telegram. The message, which had arrived at Wimsey's London flat that morning, read, "Come at once. Something terrible has happened. Inspector Parker here. Matter extremely urgent. H. Fay Ain, Ashcombe Hall." Wimsey had read it twice. Then he had said, "How wonderfully English." Now, as he crossed the entrance hall, he found Inspector Charles Parker waiting beside an enormous stone fireplace. Parker looked tired. This was not unusual. Parker looked tired in the presence of murder, burglary, blackmail, attempted murder, suspicious deaths, and occasionally particularly complicated traffic accidents. He had once remarked that crime was chiefly a question of paperwork. "Hello, Peter." "My dear Charles. You look as though somebody has murdered your afternoon." "They have." "Ah." Wimsey removed his gloves. "Who?" Parker stared at him. "Dr. Henry Fane." There was a pause. Wimsey glanced toward the staircase. "Fane. Yes. Dead. Very. Natural causes." "No." "Suicide." "No." "Then I presume we have reached the tedious alternative." Parker's expression did not change. "Murder." Wimsey sighed. "How vulgar." Parker led him toward the library. The door stood open. Beyond it was a room lined with books, dark oak, green leather chairs, and portraits of dead Fanes who appeared to have regarded happiness as a moral failing. At the center of the room stood a writing desk. Beside it lay the body. Dr. Henry Fane had been a large man in life and remained an inconveniently large man in death. He was lying on his back, one arm bent beneath him, the other stretched toward the fireplace. A dark stain marked the collar of his white shirt. There was no weapon immediately visible. The windows were shut. The fireplace was cold. A brass clock stood upon the mantel. It had stopped at 4:17. Wimsey walked to the threshold and stopped. He did not immediately examine the body. Instead, he looked at the carpet. Parker noticed. "What?" "Nothing. You're staring at the floor." "Yes." "Anything there?" "Possibly." Parker sighed. "Peter." "My dear fellow, I have only just arrived. It would be unreasonable to have discovered the murderer before seeing the corpse." He stepped into the room. The carpet was an old Persian affair, faded into a complicated pattern of red, blue, and brown. It covered almost the entire floor, except for a narrow strip of polished wood around the walls. Wimsey approached the desk. A silver inkstand stood upon it. A fountain pen lay beside an unfinished letter. There was also a small ivory paper knife. Wimsey examined none of these. Instead, he looked at the fireplace, then the clock, then the windows, then the door. Finally, he looked back at the carpet. "Was anything moved?" he asked. Parker frowned. "Not that I know of." "Excellent. What does that mean?" "It means that someone has been very careful." Parker looked toward the corpse. "There's no sign of a struggle." "Precisely. Could have been poisoned. Could have been. But the wound, Wimsey crouched beside the body. He examined the collar, then the man's face. Blunt instrument, probably. Probably. The doctor isn't here yet. Who found him? His secretary. Name? Edwin March. And where is he? Waiting outside. Good. Don't let him leave. Parker nodded. Wimsey stood. Was the body discovered at 4:17? We don't know. But the clock stopped then. Yes. Who wound it? Fane did. Every day. So the servants say. Interesting. He moved toward the mantelpiece. The brass clock was an old carriage clock, French, with a cracked glass front. Wimsey leaned closer. Has anyone touched this? No. Are you sure? I've been here since 5. And the clock was like this. Yes. Wimsey smiled faintly. Then I should like to meet your murderer. Parker stared. Why? Because he appears to have been killed at 4:17. Parker waited. And yet, Wimsey continued, I have a distinct suspicion that Dr. Fane had already been dead for some time before the clock stopped. Parker looked at the clock. How can you tell? I can't. Then why say it? Because the alternative would be much less amusing. Parker gave him the familiar expression which meant that he had already regretted asking. At that moment the door opened. A woman stood there. She was perhaps 45, tall and remarkably composed, dressed in black wool with a string of pearls at her throat. Her face had the pale, controlled appearance of somebody who had spent years learning not to say what she thought. Lady Fane? Asked Parker. Yes. She looked at the body. For a moment her expression changed. Not grief, recognition. Then it vanished. My husband is dead, she said. Yes. Who killed him? We don't know yet. Lady Fane looked at Wimsey. And you are? Lord Peter Wimsey. Her eyes narrowed slightly. I have heard of you. How alarming. She did not smile. My husband had enemies. Most interesting people do. He was not an interesting man. Then perhaps his enemies were. Something flickered across her face. Anger, perhaps, or amusement. Wimsey could not tell. He had learned long ago that people who were good at hiding emotions were not necessarily innocent. Sometimes they were merely experienced. Lady Fane entered the room. She stopped beside the desk. There is something missing. Parker turned. What? My husband always kept it there. She pointed to the corner of the desk. A rectangular patch of polished wood was visible where something had recently stood. What was it? Wimsey asked. A silver box. What sort of box? Small, engraved. What was inside? I don't know. You never looked? No. Remarkable restraint. She ignored him. It was always there. When did you last see it? Yesterday evening. Where? Here. At what time? Lady Fane hesitated. About 10. Were you alone? Yes. Wimsey's gaze rested upon her. Were you? Her eyes met his. Yes. The answer came too quickly. Wimsey smiled. Excellent. Parker frowned. What's excellent? Nothing. People are so much easier to understand when they lie promptly. Lady Fane stiffened. I have no reason to lie. Of course not. I came here to tell you that, and I am very grateful. She turned toward the door. Where are you going? Parker asked. To my room. We may need to speak with you again. I shall be there. She left. The door closed. Parker looked at Wimsey. You think she's lying? I think everyone is lying. That's helpful. Not particularly. The difficulty is determining whether they're lying about the murder. Wimsey returned to the desk. He picked up the unfinished letter. The paper contained only 3 lines. My dear Charles, there is something you must know about thee. The rest was blank. Charles, said Parker. Who is Charles? No idea. You don't think it's you? I sincerely hope not. I dislike being addressed in letters which end prematurely. He examined the paper. No date. No. No envelope. No. Pen still wet? Parker looked. No. Interesting. Wimsey glanced toward the carpet. Then he crossed the room. He knelt near the writing desk. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he reached beneath the edge of the carpet and lifted it slightly. Something metallic gleamed beneath. Parker bent down. What is it? Wimsey drew it out. A key. It was small, old-fashioned, and made of silver. The bow was engraved with a single letter, F. Parker stared. That was under the carpet, apparently. Could it have fallen there? Certainly. Could Fane have dropped it? Certainly. Could someone have put it there? Certainly. Parker looked exasperated. Peter, you are becoming a great help. My dear Charles, I am attempting to preserve the mystery. He turned the key over in his fingers. There was a tiny smear upon one side. Not blood, something darker. Wax. Wimsey's expression changed, only slightly. But Parker noticed. What? Wimsey slipped the key into an envelope. Nothing. You've said that 3 times, and each time it has been true. He looked once more at the stopped clock, 4:17, then at the empty space upon the desk where the silver box had stood, then at the unfinished letter. Finally, at the closed door through which Lady Fane had disappeared. There is one thing, he said quietly. What? Doctor, Fane was not murdered because someone hated him. Parker waited. Then why? Wimsey looked toward the corridor. Because someone was afraid of what he was about to discover. Outside, somewhere deep in the house, a bell rang once. Both men turned. The sound came from the servants' passage. Wimsey smiled. Ah, Parker reached for his coat. What? Nothing at all. The bell rang again, and beneath the faded Persian carpet, where the silver key had been hidden, a small patch of dust remained undisturbed, except for one footprint. A footprint belonging to someone who, according to everyone in Ashcombe Hall, had not entered the library that afternoon. The footprint was not large. That in itself was unhelpful. A large footprint suggested a large man, a small footprint a small man, and an average footprint suggested the existence of an average person, which was generally the least interesting possibility available to a detective. Wimsey remained crouched beside the carpet. Parker had moved nearer the door. Don't touch it. I wasn't going to. You were thinking about it. I was thinking about calling the photographer. Excellent. Do that. Parker took 2 steps toward the corridor, then stopped. The bell rang a 3rd time. This time there was no mistaking it. It came from the servants' quarters. Wimsey rose. Was that the library bell? Yes. Who operates it? Anyone pulling the cord? Then why is nobody answering? Parker opened the door. The corridor was empty. For several seconds they listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Only the faint ticking of the hall clock. Wimsey stepped outside. Where does this bell lead? To the servants' passage. Show me. They walked along the corridor. The house seemed to have grown quieter. A few minutes earlier there had been servants whispering, doors opening, shoes moving across polished floors. Now Ashcombe Hall appeared to have withdrawn into itself. At the end of the passage was a small brass indicator board. A label beneath one of the bells read, Library. The little metal pointer was trembling. Wimsey watched it. Someone has just pulled the bell. Yes. Then where are they? Parker examined the cord. It's still moving. Wimsey looked down. The cord descended through a narrow hole in the ceiling. He touched it lightly. Warm. Parker stared at him. Warm? Not the cord, Charles. The brass fitting. That proves what? Very little. Then why mention it? Because detectives who mention things which prove very little are generally considered profound. He walked away. They passed through the servants' corridor and entered the kitchen. The cook, Mrs. Bell, was standing beside the stove. She was a stout woman with gray hair and an expression of permanent resistance to modern life. Who pulled the library bell? Parker asked. No one. The bell rang. Yes, so someone pulled it. No. Parker stared at her. Mrs. Bell stared back. Wimsey intervened. Mrs. Bell, does the library bell sometimes ring by itself? No, my lord. Has it ever done so? No. Then someone pulled it. I didn't see anyone. That's not quite the same thing. She folded her arms. No, my lord. Who was nearest the bell? The footman. Which footman? George. Where is George? Feeding coal. Where? The east cellar. How long has he been gone? About 10 minutes. Parker looked at Wimsey. Wimsey looked at the clock. Does George usually take 10 minutes to fetch coal? No. How long does it usually take? 3. Thank you. He turned. Where is the east cellar? Mrs. Bell pointed toward a narrow passage. Through there, they found George at once. He was not fetching coal. He was standing beside an open cellar door, staring down the steps. The young man turned when Parker approached. "What happened?" he asked. "You tell us." George swallowed. "I heard something." "What?" "A noise." "From where?" "Below." "Did you go down?" "No, sir." "Why not?" George looked embarrassed. "Because I thought someone was there." Parker glanced at Wimsey. "Was anyone there?" "I don't know." "You didn't look?" "No, sir." Wimsey stepped forward. "What did you hear?" George hesitated. "A door." "What sort of door?" "A heavy one." "Opening or closing?" "Closing." "When?" "Just before the bell rang." "Could you hear footsteps?" "No." "Could you hear anything else?" George shook his head. Wimsey looked down the cellar stairs. "Did you see anybody?" "No." "Did you see a shadow?" "No." "Did you see a light?" George hesitated. "Yes." "What sort?" "A line of light beneath the door." "What door?" "The old wine cellar." Parker's face sharpened. "Where is it?" "Below." "Locked." "It should be." "Is it?" George looked at him. "I don't know. Go and see." George did not move. Wimsey said quietly, "I think you should." The footman descended. Parker followed. Wimsey remained at the top. There were 14 steps. He counted them without appearing to count them. At the bottom was a short stone passage. 3 doors stood along it. The first led to the coal cellar, the second to the wine cellar. The third, according to George, had not been used in years. George approached the second door. He tried the handle. It opened. Parker drew his revolver. Wimsey sighed. "Really, Charles, if there is a murderer inside, announcing yourself with a firearm is hardly subtle. Stay back." "I was planning to." The wine cellar was empty. Dust covered the floor. Rows of bottles occupied the racks. At the far end stood an old wooden table. On it was a candle. It had recently been extinguished. Wimsey entered. He examined the candle, then the floor, then the door. "Someone has been here." Parker nodded. "Obviously." "Recently." "Obviously." "Possibly within the last 15 minutes." "How can you tell?" "The wax." A small bead had fallen onto the table. It was still soft. Parker looked around. "Why would anyone come down here?" "That's the useful question." Wimsey crossed to the far wall. There was a narrow iron door set into the stone. George spoke from behind them. "That leads outside." Parker turned. "Outside?" "Yes, sir." "Where?" "Behind the yew garden." "Does it lock?" "From inside." Wimsey examined the lock. It had been recently scratched, not forced, used. He looked at George. "Who has a key?" "The family." "Which members?" "Lady Fane." "Mr. March." "Dr. Fane." "Anyone else?" George shook his head. "Perhaps the housekeeper." "Perhaps. She keeps many keys. Does she have this one?" "I don't know." Wimsey looked at the lock again. Then he smiled. "That's our first useful piece of information." Parker frowned. "What is?" "The murderer may not have entered the library through the library door." Parker looked at him. "You think they came through here?" "I think someone came through here. After the murder. Perhaps. Why?" Wimsey's eyes rested on the extinguished candle. "To make sure we looked in the wrong place." They returned upstairs. The housekeeper was waiting in the corridor. Miss Prentice was a thin, severe woman whose face suggested that she had never forgiven the world for inventing weekends. "Inspector," she said, "Lady Fane wishes to speak with you. Later. She says it is important. Everything is important at the moment." Miss Prentice looked at Wimsey. "My lord." "Miss Prentice, you found something in the cellar?" "Only wine." "There has been no wine kept there for years. Then the bottle collection must be disappointed." She did not react. "I have been in this house 32 years, she said. An impressive sentence. "I know every room. Do you know every person?" Her expression tightened. "No." "Pity." She turned to Parker. "Lady Fane is waiting." Parker went upstairs. Wimsey remained. "Miss Prentice." "Yes?" "Who used the library bell?" "I don't know." "Who could have?" "Anyone." "Who would?" "I couldn't say." Who knew Dr. Fane's habits? She paused. Everyone who lived here. Did Dr. Fane lock the library at night? Yes. Did he keep the key? Yes. Where? In his desk. Wimsey looked toward the library. Then why was the library door unlocked today? Miss Prentice went very still. I assumed the police had opened it. They didn't. I see. No, said Wimsey softly. I don't think you do. For the first time, the housekeeper looked frightened. Only for an instant. Then the expression disappeared. I have work to do. She walked away. Wimsey watched her go. Bunter appeared at the end of the corridor. My lord. Yes? I have spoken to the chauffeur. And? He says the motor car belonging to Mr. March left the house at 4 o'clock. Wimsey turned. Did it return? No, my lord. When? About 5:30. Wimsey's face became thoughtful. Very good. Bunter lowered his voice. And there is something else. What? The chauffeur says Mr. March did not drive it. Wimsey looked toward the staircase. Who did? He says Lady Fane did. For several seconds, Wimsey said nothing. Then the library clock struck the quarter hour. 4:17 had long since passed. Yet the clock still insisted upon it. Wimsey walked back into the library. He stood before the stopped clock. On its brass case was a faint smear of candle wax. The same wax he had seen in the cellar. He touched it with one finger. Then he looked at the silver key inside its evidence envelope. The engraved letter was still visible. F. Fane, or Fanes, or something else. Wimsey's smile vanished. Charles, he said when Parker returned, I think we have been asking the wrong question. Parker removed his gloves. What question should we be asking? Not who killed Dr. Fane. Then what? Wimsey looked toward the empty space on the desk. We should ask what Dr. Fane discovered before somebody killed him. The draft moved through the room. The unfinished letter fluttered. For one moment the final blank line seemed almost to contain writing. Wimsey picked it up. There was nothing there. Nothing visible, at least. He held the paper toward the window. A faint impression appeared beneath the ink, words pressed into the sheet by a page that had once lain above it. Wimsey read them silently. Then he folded the paper. What does it say? Parker asked. Wimsey looked at him. Only 3 words. What words? Bring the key. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, a single object struck wood with a soft metallic sound. Neither man moved. Wimsey merely smiled. Ah, he murmured. That, said Parker, I don't like. Neither do I. Wimsey looked down at the carpet. But I am beginning to understand it. The sound came again, the faint metallic knock beneath the floorboards, followed by silence. Parker looked at Wimsey. Wimsey looked at the carpet. Neither spoke. Then Wimsey crossed the room and closed the library door. Why are you doing that? Parker asked. Because if our invisible visitor intends to make another noise, I should prefer him to do it privately. You think somebody is hiding under the floor? No. Then what? I think somebody wants us to think somebody is hiding under the floor. Parker stared at him. You make everything unnecessarily complicated. My dear Charles, murder is already complicated. I merely decline to insult it by pretending otherwise. Wimsey knelt beside the carpet. The Persian rug was thick, old, and badly stretched. Along its eastern edge, however, the pile showed a curious disturbance. The fibers had been brushed in the opposite direction from the rest. He ran his fingers across them. Here. Parker crouched beside him. What am I looking at? A carpet. Thank you. Always glad to assist. Wimsey followed the disturbed fibers toward the writing desk. They stopped beneath it. He moved the chair aside. There, in the polished floorboards, was a narrow brass fitting. It resembled the rim of a keyhole. Parker bent down. There's no lock. Not visible, at any rate. Wimsey took the silver key from its envelope. He held it above the brass fitting. The key did not fit. Parker smiled. Rather destroys the theory. Not at all. Wimsey turned the key over. The teeth were unusually fine. He examined the brass fitting again. Then he looked toward the fireplace. Do you know what I find most irritating about old houses? The drafts? No, their habit of concealing useful things in architectural features. He crossed to the fireplace and studied the stonework. The mantel was carved with the Fane family crest, a stag beneath a crescent moon. Wimsey touched the crescent. Nothing happened. He touched the stag. Nothing. He tapped the stone with his knuckles. The sound changed beneath his hand. Parker heard it. Hollow, indeed. Wimsey smiled. Now we are getting somewhere. He ran his fingers along the carved edge. There was a tiny indentation beneath the stag's hoof. The silver key fitted it perfectly. There was a soft click. A section of the stonework moved inward. Parker stepped back. I dislike this. So do I. It is far too theatrical. The panel opened only a few inches. Behind it was a narrow cavity. Inside lay a small silver box. For several seconds neither man spoke. The box was precisely the object Lady Fane had said was missing from Dr. Fane's desk. Wimsey removed it carefully. It was tarnished, but the engraving remained clear. The initials were HF. Parker looked at him. That settles one thing. Yes, Lady Fane told the truth about the box. Possibly. Possibly. She said it was missing. And it was, indeed. Then why are you still suspicious of her? Because truth is not the same thing as innocence. Wimsey placed the box upon the desk. There was no visible lock. He examined the lid. Have you noticed something? Parker shook his head. The box is warm. Parker touched it. He withdrew his hand. You're right. Someone handled it recently, but it was hidden behind the fireplace. Precisely. Parker looked toward the door. Then someone has been in here. Very probably. When? Recently. How recently? Wimsey examined the warmth again. Within the last hour, I should think. Parker swore quietly. The murderer might still be inside the house. Wimsey opened the box. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, a small brass disc, and a photograph. He picked up the photograph first. It showed Dr. Fane standing beside another man. The second man was younger, perhaps 30. He wore a dark suit and stood stiffly beside Fane, as though the photographer had ordered him to smile and he had considered the request beneath him. Parker leaned over. Who is that? Wimsey turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. Henry Fane and Edward Vale, 1919. Parker frowned. Edward Vale? Yes. Never heard of him. Neither have I. Wimsey looked at the photograph again. Something about the younger man's face disturbed him. Not because he recognized it, because he almost did. Charles? Yes? How old would you say that man is? 30. And the photograph is from 1919. Yes? So if he survived, he'd be well over 40 now. Closer to 50. Wimsey nodded. And yet I have the unpleasant feeling that I saw him this afternoon. Parker's expression changed. Where? Wimsey did not answer immediately. He turned the photograph over again. Below the inscription was a second line. One of us must disappear. Parker read it. What does that mean? I don't know. You've got an idea. I have several. None of them pleasant. The brass disc in the box bore another engraving. A number. 17. Wimsey placed it beside the photograph. Then he unfolded the paper. There were only 4 lines. The silver key opens what was never meant to be opened. The 17th bell tells the truth. Trust neither the clock nor the witness. And remember Vale. Parker stared at the page. That's rather melodramatic. Yes. Could Fane have written it? Possibly. Could the murderer have? More likely. Why leave it for us? Wimsey smiled. Because murderers are human. That explains nothing. It explains everything. They cannot resist becoming authors of their own cleverness. He folded the paper. But this note is not a confession. What is it? A direction. To what? The 17th bell. Parker looked toward the corridor. The bell has already rung 3 times. 3 audible rings. What's the difference? Wimsey walked toward the library door. Come. They returned to the servants' passage. The bell indicator stood motionless. Parker pointed. There. The small brass pointer had shifted. It now rested against a faint mark scratched into the wood. 17. 17. Wimsey touched it. Someone marked this. When? Recently. Why? Perhaps because they wanted someone to notice. Parker frowned. Who? Wimsey turned. The servants' corridor was empty. Then a door opened at the far end. George the footman appeared. He looked frightened. Inspector. Yes? Lady Fane sent me. What does she want? She says you must come to the drawing room. Why? George swallowed. She says she knows who killed Dr. Fane. Parker exchanged a glance with Wimsey. Did she say the name? No, sir. Did she tell you anything else? George hesitated. She said Lord Peter must come alone. Wimsey raised an eyebrow. How flattering. Parker shook his head. I'm coming with you. No. Peter, if she knows something, we should hear it without frightening her into silence. You're not going alone. I shall not be alone. Parker looked around. With whom? Wimsey smiled. With the murderer, presumably. He walked toward the drawing room. Parker followed. The door stood open. Lady Fane was waiting beside the window. She had changed nothing about her appearance, but her composure had deteriorated. Her hands were clasped tightly before her. I asked for Lord Peter. You have him. I must speak privately. Parker remained in the doorway. Lady Fane looked at him. Inspector, please. Parker hesitated. Wimsey gave him a slight nod. Parker stepped into the corridor, but left the door ajar. Lady Fane waited until he had moved several feet away. Then she spoke. You found the box. Wimsey did not react. How did you know? Because it was hidden for that purpose. By whom? My husband. Why? Because he was afraid. Of whom? Lady Fane looked toward the corridor. Then she whispered, Edward Vale. Wimsey's expression became still. Who is Edward Vale? My husband's closest friend. The man in the photograph. Yes. When did you last see him? Lady Fane closed her eyes. This afternoon. Where? In the library. Wimsey said nothing. Henry was alive when I left him. At what time? 4 o'clock. And Vale? He was there. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Then why did you tell Inspector Parker you were alone in the library last night? Lady Fane stared at him. Because I was. You said you were alone. Last night. Precisely. And Vale was here this afternoon. Yes. Where is he now? She looked toward the window. I don't know. Wimsey studied her. You drove his car. Lady Fane went pale. How did you? The chauffeur told me. He was injured. Vale? No. Henry. She swallowed. After Vale left the library, Henry collapsed. What did you do? I panicked. And drove away? Yes. Why? I thought... She stopped. Wimsey waited. I thought if I stayed they would say I had killed him. Who are they? The police. Why would they say that? She looked directly at him. Because I had every reason to want him dead. There was silence. Then something struck the floor upstairs, a heavy object. Parker appeared instantly in the doorway. Peter. Wimsey turned. What was that? Parker shook his head. Someone has run through the upper corridor. They rushed upstairs. The corridor was empty. At the far end, however, a window stood open. Beyond it lay the yew garden. Wimsey approached. On the sill was a smear of fresh mud. Beside it lay a small silver object, a cufflink, engraved with the letter V. Parker picked it up. Vale. Wimsey looked outside. The lawn was empty. The yew trees stood black against the evening sky. Then Wimsey noticed something else. A narrow trail of wet footprints crossed the grass. They led away from the house, but after 20 yards, they stopped. Not faded. Not interrupted. Stopped. As though the person wearing the shoes had simply ceased to exist. Parker stared. That's impossible. Not at all. Wimsey crouched beside the last footprint. The impression was unusually deep. He touched the edge. Someone was carrying something heavy. Val? Perhaps. What? Wimsey looked back toward Ashcombe Hall. The silver box. Parker's face tightened. But we have it. Wimsey slowly stood. No. He reached into his pocket. The silver box was still there. He opened it. The photograph remained. The note remained. The brass disc remained. But the final object, the one neither of them had examined carefully, was gone. A tiny keyhole-shaped compartment at the bottom of the box stood open. Wimsey stared at it. Inside was a fragment of paper. Only 4 words were visible. Ask the housekeeper about 1919. He folded the fragment. Charles. Yes? I think Miss Prentice has been waiting 32 years to tell us something. And what makes you think she'll tell us now? Wimsey looked toward the dark corridor, because someone has just murdered the only man who could contradict her. Then, from somewhere below, the library bell rang for the 17th time. The 17th ring was followed by silence. Not the comfortable silence of an empty room, but the peculiar silence which descends upon a house when every person within it is listening for the same thing. Parker looked at Wimsey. Wimsey looked toward the ceiling. "Did you hear that?" Parker asked. "Unfortunately." "The bell?" "No, your heartbeat." Parker frowned. "My heartbeat. Rather fast. I've just been running upstairs." "Quite. Murder is excellent exercise." They descended together. The library door remained open. The bell indicator on the servants' board had returned to its resting position. There was no movement anywhere along the corridor. Wimsey walked into the library and stopped beside the desk. The clock still showed 4:17. He regarded it for several seconds. 17, he murmured. Parker followed his gaze. "You think the 17th ring is connected with the clock?" "I think whoever wrote that note wanted us to believe it was." "That's not the same thing." "Precisely." Wimsey removed the silver box from his pocket and placed it on the desk. "The interesting question is not why the bell rang 17 times. Then what is? Why it rang at all?" Parker stared at him. "You've lost me. Someone had to pull it. We know that. Do we?" Parker's expression hardened. "Peter, we heard it. We heard the bell. We did not see the person who caused it. So a bell can be operated in more than one manner." Wimsey crossed to the wall. The library bell cord disappeared through a small brass aperture. He examined the fitting. Then he pulled the cord gently. The bell rang in the servants' passage. Again. But this time Wimsey did not release it. He pulled twice. The bell rang twice. He pulled 3 times. 3 rings. Parker watched. "You're demonstrating that bells work." "No, I'm demonstrating something else." Wimsey stopped. "Listen." They waited. Nothing. Then, faintly, came a metallic click from somewhere inside the wall. Parker stepped closer. "What was that?" "Exactly." Wimsey pulled the cord once more. Click. The sound came again. "There's a mechanism behind it," he said. He took out his pocket knife and carefully loosened the brass plate. Behind it was a narrow channel containing the bell wire, but beside the wire was another thin cord, almost invisible in the darkness. Parker bent down. "What's that?" "A second line." "To where?" Wimsey followed it with his fingers. "It goes upward. Into the ceiling?" "Yes. And then, I haven't the faintest idea." He stood. "Which is why we shall have to find out." Before Parker could answer, footsteps sounded behind them. Both men turned. Miss Prentice stood in the doorway. The housekeeper's face had become strangely pale. "You mustn't do that," she said. Wimsey smiled. "Do what?" "Open things. An excellent principle for domestic life, less useful in detective work. You don't understand." "No, that's why I am investigating." She looked at the silver box on the desk. For the first time since Wimsey had met her, her composure completely failed. "You found it?" "Yes." "Then you know." "I know that Dr. Fane hid a silver box behind the fireplace." Miss Prentice shook her head. "No. No? You know where it was hidden. You don't know why." "That is true." She stepped into the room. Parker closed the door behind her. "Tell us about 1919, he said. The housekeeper looked at him. "Who told you?" "The silver box." Her eyes moved to Wimsey. "Then Henry left something behind." "He left several things." "Did he tell you about Edward?" "Only enough to make him interesting." Miss Prentice lowered herself into a chair. For a moment she seemed older, not merely tired, but diminished, as though 30 years had suddenly been placed upon her shoulders. Edward Vale was not Henry's friend. "What was he?" Wimsey asked. "His brother." Parker stared. "Brother?" "Yes. But the photograph says whatever Henry wanted people to believe." Wimsey remained standing. "Were they twins?" "No." "Half-brothers?" "Yes." "Same father?" "Yes." "Same mother?" "No." Miss Prentice looked toward the window. Henry was the legitimate son. Edward was not. "Ah," said Wimsey. There was no amusement in his voice. "That old story. It was worse than that." "How?" "Their father died in 1919. Parker frowned. "And?" "He did not die naturally." The room seemed colder. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "How did he die?" "He fell from the West Tower." "Accident?" That was the official conclusion. "And the truth?" Miss Prentice looked at him. "Edward was there." "Did he push him?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I saw them arguing." "When?" "On the night of the 17th. "The 17th of what?" "November." Wimsey glanced toward the stopped clock. "November 17th. "Yes." Parker exchanged a look with him. "And today?" Parker asked. "November 17th. Nobody spoke. The date suddenly seemed to occupy the room like a fourth investigator. Wimsey walked slowly toward the fireplace. 32 years. Yes. Why would Dr. Fane be investigating his brother now? Because Edward returned. When? 3 weeks ago. Parker swore. Where? Miss Prentice pointed toward the portrait gallery. Under another name. Wimsey's eyes sharpened. What name? Mr. Edwin March. The silence that followed was absolute. Parker stared at the housekeeper. The secretary? She nodded. Edwin March is Edward Vale. Wimsey said nothing. He turned toward the desk. The unfinished letter, the photograph, the silver key, the missing compartment. Everything appeared to rearrange itself. Then why, Parker said slowly, would Fane employ the man he believed was his brother? Because Henry did not know. Miss Prentice's voice had become very quiet. He thought Edward was dead. Then when did he discover the truth? Yesterday. Parker looked at Wimsey. Wimsey's expression remained unreadable. Who told him? I did. Why? Because I was there in 1919. Parker leaned forward. What did you see? Miss Prentice closed her eyes. I saw Edward leave the tower. And Henry. He came down afterward. Alone? Yes. Did you see the dead man? No. Then how do you know Edward killed him? I don't. Wimsey nodded. Very important distinction. Parker frowned. But you said Henry discovered the truth yesterday. He discovered Edward's identity. And what happened after that? Miss Prentice looked at the carpet. They argued. Where? The library. When? About 3:30. Anyone else present? No. How long did the argument last? 20 minutes. What did they argue about? 1919. Did you hear the words? Some. Which? She hesitated. Henry said, you came back for the key. Wimsey's eyes went to the silver key. And Edward, he said, you kept it for 32 years. Parker looked at the key. What does it open? Miss Prentice shook her head. I don't know. Then why is it important? Because Henry believed it proved what happened in 1919. What? The death was not an accident. Parker sat down. Whose death? Their father's. Wimsey remained by the fireplace. Who killed him? Miss Prentice looked at him. That is the question. Edward? I don't know. Henry? I don't know. Then who? She hesitated. There was a third person. The words seemed to settle heavily into the room. Wimsey turned. Who? Miss Prentice's lips parted. Before she could answer, a violent crash came from upstairs. Parker sprang to the door. Stay here. Wimsey followed. They reached the portrait gallery within seconds. A window stood open. One of the portraits had fallen from the wall. Glass covered the floor. Parker looked around. Nobody. Wimsey approached the fallen portrait. It showed a stern elderly man in a black coat. The brass plate beneath it read, Sir Alfred Fane, 1871-1919. Wimsey crouched. Behind the frame was a second photograph. He pulled it free. It showed 3 people, Sir Alfred Fane, Henry Fane, and a young woman. Wimsey stared at her face. Parker leaned over. Who is she? Miss Prentice had followed them into the gallery. The moment she saw the photograph, she stopped. Her face became utterly white. Wimsey looked at her. You know her? Miss Prentice whispered. Yes. "Who is she?" For several seconds she could not speak. Then she said, "Margaret Vale." Parker frowned. "Edward's mother?" Miss Prentice nodded. "But she died before 1919. No." She looked toward the darkened end of the gallery. "That's what everyone was told." Wimsey studied the photograph. There was something peculiar about it. The woman was standing beside Sir Alfred. His hand rested lightly upon her shoulder. Henry stood on the other side, but Edward was nowhere in the picture. Wimsey turned it over. A date had been written in faded ink, November 17th, 1919. Below it, in another hand, were 6 words. "She knows where the key is." Parker stared. Margaret Vale was alive. "Yes," said Wimsey. "And she may still be alive." "Yes." "Then where is she?" Wimsey looked at Miss Prentice. The housekeeper said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. "Miss Prentice," Wimsey said softly, "where is Margaret Vale?" The woman closed her eyes. "In this house." Parker reached instinctively for his notebook. "Where?" Miss Prentice opened her eyes. "She's been here all along." A floorboard creaked behind them. They turned. At the far end of the gallery, a door was slowly closing. Wimsey ran toward it. He reached it before it shut. Beyond was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. On the lowest step lay a silver key, not the one they had found in the library. Another, identical, except for the engraving. This one bore the letter M. Wimsey picked it up. It was warm, very warm. He looked down the staircase. "Charles." "Yes? I think we've just discovered the real reason Dr. Fane was murdered." "What?" Wimsey held up the key. He was not protecting a secret from the past. He looked into the darkness. He was protecting someone who was still alive. From somewhere below came a woman's voice. Old, weak, but unmistakably clear. Henry promised he would never tell. Then the light at the top of the staircase went out. The darkness lasted only 3 seconds. Parker's match flared first. The tiny flame illuminated his face, Wimsey's hand upon the banister, and the pale oval of Miss Prentice's features behind them. Then the match went out. "Rather atmospheric," said Wimsey. "Do stop talking," Parker replied. "My dear Charles, conversation is one of the few weapons available to an unarmed man." Another match was struck. This time Parker found the wall switch. The electric light came on with a faint click. The staircase was empty. The voice had vanished. Wimsey looked at the steps. The second silver key was still lying where he had found it. He picked it up with his handkerchief. Miss Prentice remained at the top of the stairs. "Where does this lead?" She did not answer. "Miss Prentice, below the house. That is geographically reassuring. To the old nursery. An old nursery beneath the house. It was built there when the west wing was added." Parker examined the staircase. "Why have I not heard of this room?" "Because it has been locked for years." "By whom?" "Dr. Fane." Wimsey turned the silver key between his fingers. "And yet the key was here." "Yes." "Which suggests that someone has recently opened the door." Miss Prentice said nothing. Parker looked at her. "You've been lying to us." The housekeeper's face hardened. "I have told you what I know. That isn't what I said." She looked toward the dark staircase. "I have spent 32 years in this house. I have seen people lie to themselves, to one another, and to the dead. I learned long ago that the truth is rarely improved by being spoken too early." Wimsey smiled faintly. "A remarkably sensible philosophy. Then you understand." "Oh, entirely. Unfortunately, I am a detective, which means I am professionally obliged to be disagreeable." He began descending. Parker followed. Miss Prentice remained where she was. "You are not coming?" Parker asked. "No. Why?" She looked at Wimsey. "Because the woman below does not trust the police." Wimsey paused. "Does she trust me?" "I don't know." "Excellent. Uncertainty is the beginning of friendship." He continued down. The staircase was narrow and steep. At the bottom was a corridor of bare stone. The air smelled faintly of dust, damp wood, and something medicinal. 3 doors stood along the passage. The first was locked. The second stood open. The third had been painted shut. Wimsey examined the open door. A small brass plaque read, "Nursery." Parker looked at him. Why would anyone hide an old woman in a nursery? Perhaps because nobody thinks to look for old women in nurseries. That's not an answer. It wasn't intended to be. Wimsey pushed the door wider. Inside was a surprisingly comfortable room. There was a narrow bed, a coal stove, a small table, 2 chairs and several shelves filled with books. A lamp burned beside the bed, but the room was empty. Parker swore. Wimsey did not. He looked at the bed. The blanket was still warm. Someone had been lying there. On the table stood a cup of tea. Beside it was a saucer. The tea was untouched. Wimsey examined the surface. A thin skin had formed. She's been here recently. How recently? Within an hour. Parker crossed to the door. There are no other exits. Look again. Parker searched the walls. Wimsey examined the floor. Near the bed was a small rug. Its edge was slightly raised. He lifted it. Beneath was a trapdoor. Parker stared. Of course. Quite. Wimsey opened it. A ladder descended into darkness. Does this house have any rooms which are actually rooms? Apparently not. Wimsey looked down. A faint light was visible below. Someone has gone through here. Parker drew his revolver again. Wimsey sighed. Must you? Yes. Very well. But if you shoot the plumbing, I shall be most annoyed. They descended. The passage below was cramped. It led beneath the nursery and toward the west wing. After approximately 30 yards, they reached an iron gate. Beyond it was a small chamber. A woman sat beside a table. She was very old. Her hair was completely white, but her eyes were sharp. She looked at Parker first, then at Wimsey. Finally, she said, "You are Henry's detective." Wimsey inclined his head. "Lord Peter Wimsey. I know. That saves time." She looked at Parker. "You are the policeman. Inspector Parker." "I don't like policemen." "That makes 2 of us," said Wimsey. Parker gave him a look. The old woman smiled. For the first time, some warmth entered her expression. "You have his manner." "Whose?" "Alfred's." "Sir Alfred Fane?" "Yes." She studied him. "Your face is different." "Thank heaven." She almost laughed. Then her expression became grave. "You have the key." Wimsey held it up. "The M?" "Yes." "Why does it matter?" "Because it opens the room where the truth was buried." Parker looked around. "This room?" "No." She pointed toward the wall. "Beyond." Wimsey approached. The wall was stone, but one section had been recently disturbed. A thin line ran vertically through the mortar. He touched it. "What's behind here?" "The past." "Rather overcrowded, I should think." She smiled again. Then she said, "Edward killed Henry." Parker's eyes sharpened. "You're certain?" "Yes." "How?" "I saw him." "When?" "Today." "Where?" "In the library." Wimsey's voice remained calm. "What time?" 4. Parker looked at him. The stopped clock. 4:17. "Was Henry alive?" "Yes." "What happened?" "Edward struck him." "With what?" "A brass object." "Which object?" She looked at the silver key. "Not that." Wimsey studied her. "You saw the murder?" "No." Parker frowned. "You just said you saw him." "I saw Edward strike Henry, and then I left." "Why?" "Because Henry told me to." Wimsey's expression changed. "Why would a dying man tell you to leave?" "He wasn't dying." "When you left?" "No." "Then what happened afterward?" "I don't know." "Who found the body?" "The secretary." "Edward Vale?" She nodded. Parker looked toward Wimsey. "We have a problem." "Several." "Edward was the secretary." "Yes." "He could have murdered Fane." "Yes." "He could have staged the scene." "Yes." "And then he disappeared, apparently. So why are we still sitting here?" Wimsey looked at the old woman. "Because she has just told us something impossible." The woman smiled. "Have I?" "Yes." "You believe me?" "No." "Good." She stood slowly. "My name is Margaret Vale." Parker stared. "Edward's mother?" "Yes." "And you were supposed to be dead?" "I was." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer." Wimsey studied her carefully. "No," he said. "You were not supposed to be dead. You were supposed to have disappeared. Margaret looked at him. Very clever. Not particularly. Your existence explains too many things, such as the photograph, the hidden room, Edward's return, Fane's fear, the silver keys. Margaret nodded. And the murder. Not yet. She looked disappointed. Then you have not understood the most important thing. What is that? She walked toward the stone wall. Henry did not hide me because I was dangerous. Then why? Because I knew who killed Sir Alfred. Parker stepped closer. Who? Margaret placed her hand against the wall. Henry. Silence. Wimsey did not move. Parker stared at her. Henry killed his father. Yes. Why? Because Alfred had discovered that Henry was not his son. The revelation hung in the air. Wimsey's face became thoughtful. So Edward was the legitimate heir? No. Margaret shook her head. Neither of them was. Parker frowned. Then whose son was Henry? Margaret looked at Wimsey. That is why the silver key matters. She inserted the key into a tiny lock hidden within the stone. It turned. Something inside the wall clicked. A section of masonry moved inward. Beyond it was a narrow chamber. There was no corpse, no treasure, only a wooden desk and a locked metal drawer. On the desk lay a ledger. Wimsey opened it. The first page contained a list of names. The final entry was dated November 17th, 1919. Beside it were 3 initials. HF, EV, MV. Below them was one sentence. The child must never know. Parker looked at Wimsey. What child? Wimsey turned the page. There was a birth certificate. He read it. Then he read it again. His expression became unusually grave. Charles. Yes? I think we've been investigating the wrong family. Parker took the document. His face changed. The certificate named the mother, Margaret Vale. The father's name had been deliberately blacked out. But beneath the ink was a faint impression. Wimsey held the paper toward the lamp. The hidden letters slowly became visible. Alfred Fane. Parker stared. Then Henry was not Alfred's son. Edward? Nor his. Margaret closed her eyes. The child was a girl. Wimsey looked at her. Who? Margaret whispered the name. Elizabeth. Parker shook his head. Who is Elizabeth? Margaret looked toward the ceiling. Lady Fane. Wimsey became very still. Outside the underground chamber, somewhere far above them, a door slammed. Then came footsteps, running. Wimsey extinguished the lamp. Someone knows we've found this. Parker whispered. Who? Wimsey listened. The footsteps stopped directly above them. Then a man's voice called through the floor. Lord Peter. Wimsey recognized it immediately. Edwin March. Edward Vale, alive, and very close. The old woman began to tremble. Wimsey leaned toward Parker. Now we know why the murderer needed Dr. Fane dead. Why? Because Fane had discovered that Lady Fane was the missing child. Parker stared into the darkness. And Edward. Wimsey's voice was barely audible. Edward is not trying to inherit Ashcombe Hall. A pause. He is trying to find out who his father was. Above them, the footsteps began again. This time they were moving toward the nursery. Wimsey looked at the hidden ledger, then at Margaret, then at Parker. We have approximately 30 seconds. For what? To discover whether Edward knows what we have just learned. The footsteps reached the nursery door. The handle began to turn. The handle turned. Wimsey did not move. Beside him, Parker had drawn his revolver, though the darkness made the gesture rather more symbolic than useful. Margaret stood perfectly still. Only her breathing betrayed her fear. The handle stopped. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Light from the nursery spilled into the underground chamber. A man's silhouette appeared above the trapdoor. Lord Peter. It was Edwin March. Wimsey smiled. Good evening, Mr. March. The silhouette disappeared. There was a sudden movement. Parker raised his revolver. Stay where you are. Footsteps retreated across the nursery. A door slammed. Parker ran toward the ladder. Wimsey caught his sleeve. Wait. Peter. Listen. They listened. Nothing. Then came the faint sound of a window being opened. Wimsey released him. Now. They climbed. The nursery was empty. The window stood open. Cold November air poured through it. Parker crossed the room and looked outside. There are no footprints. Of course not. Parker turned. What do you mean? Wimsey pointed to the window. It opens over the old stone courtyard. Whoever left would have had to cross the gravel. Parker looked down. Nothing, exactly. He examined the latch. Someone opened it from inside. So he never left. Not through this window. Parker searched the room, the bed, the table, the cupboard. Nothing. Then Wimsey noticed the rug. He lifted it. The trapdoor stood open. He went back down. Parker stared. But we were down there. Yes. So where did he go? Wimsey smiled. Perhaps he didn't. He descended again. The underground chamber was empty. Margaret had disappeared. Parker swore. She was here. Yes. Where did she go? Wimsey looked at the stone wall, then the desk, then the hidden passage, through another door. He pressed against the masonry. Nothing happened. Parker examined the floor. A small trail of dust led toward the metal drawer. The drawer was open. The ledger was gone. Wimsey's expression hardened. He knew exactly what to take. Parker turned. Then he must have been watching us. Probably. From where? Wimsey looked upward. The ceiling was made of old beams and stone. There. A small hole had been cut through one of the beams. Parker followed his gaze. Observation point. Indeed. From the nursery. Yes. Then March has known about this room, or discovered it before us. Parker rubbed his forehead. I'm beginning to dislike this man. That is encouraging. They returned to the nursery. The room seemed unchanged, except for one thing. The cup of tea was gone. Wimsey touched the saucer, still warm. He took it. Why? He was thirsty. Peter. Very well. He was here long enough to take the cup deliberately. Parker looked toward the door. Where now? Upstairs. They hurried back to the library. The house had become strangely active. Servants whispered in the corridor. A door slammed somewhere on the first floor. Mrs. Hund. Bell appeared from the kitchen. Inspector. What is it? Mr. March has been asking for Lady Fane. Where? The drawing room. Parker exchanged a glance with Wimsey. They went immediately. Lady Fane was standing beside the fireplace. Her face was pale. March stood opposite her. He looked perfectly calm. He wore the same dark suit as before. No blood. No weapon. No sign of panic. He looked at Wimsey. Lord Peter. Mr. March. You have been looking for me. I have. Why? I wanted to ask you about your brother. March's face did not change. I have no brother. Edward Vale. A silence. Then March smiled. That is a very old name. Indeed. Why ask me? Because you were seen in the library with Dr. Fane this afternoon. By whom? Several people. Interesting. Were you there? Yes. Parker stepped forward. At what time? About 3:30. What happened? We argued. About family matters. Then Dr. Fane was alive when you left? Yes. What time? 4. Wimsey watched him carefully. Exactly 4. Approximately. Did you look at the clock? No. Then why say 4? March smiled. Because that was when I left. Did anyone see you? No. Then how do you know? I remember. Convenient. March shrugged. I cannot help your suspicion. No, said Wimsey. You seem remarkably capable of helping it yourself. Lady Fane spoke. Peter, please. Wimsey looked at her. Did you know Mr. March before today? No. March looked at her. For the first time, something passed between them. Not hatred, recognition. Wimsey noticed. So, he said quietly, you do know one another. Lady Fane turned away. March remained silent. Parker looked from one to the other. What is going on? March sighed. Nothing. That's becoming the most suspicious word in this house, said Wimsey. March walked toward the desk. He stopped beside the empty space where the silver box had been. You found it? Yes. What was inside? Why don't you tell me? March looked at him. I don't know. Then why did you come back for it? I didn't. You were seen entering the underground passage. I was never there. Wimsey smiled. Then perhaps the house itself is lying. March's eyes narrowed. Perhaps. He turned toward the door. Parker blocked his way. You're not leaving. March looked at him. On what grounds? Suspicion. That's hardly legal. Neither is murder. March's expression hardened. I didn't kill Henry Fane. Then who did? March hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was enough. I don't know. Wimsey watched him. Interesting. What? You called him Henry? March froze. Parker looked at Wimsey. What? Everyone in this house calls him Dr. Fane. His wife calls him Henry only in private. March said nothing. Wimsey's voice remained mild. How did you know? I knew him. As Edward. March looked at him. As someone who had known him a long time. Before you became his secretary? Yes. Before you came to Ashcombe? Yes. Then why hide your identity? March's face changed. You already know? Yes. Then there is no point denying it. He looked toward Lady Fane. My name is Edward Vale. Parker moved closer. Were you in the library when Fane was killed? No. Did you strike him? No. Did you see him after 4? No. Then where were you? Edward hesitated. Outside. Where? In the garden. Doing what? Thinking. Wimsey raised an eyebrow. An admirable activity. What about? My mother. Lady Fane suddenly looked at him. Edward noticed. You know her. It was not a question. Lady Fane's lips trembled. I have never seen you before. You're lying. Wimsey stepped between them. Perhaps we should avoid destroying the furniture. Edward laughed bitterly. She knows. Knows what? My mother. Wimsey looked at Lady Fane. Do you? No. Then why are you frightened? She did not answer. Edward took a step toward her. Tell him. Stop. Tell him what you did. Edward. His expression changed. The name had escaped her. Parker's hand moved toward his revolver. Wimsey remained calm. Lady Fane. She closed her eyes. I knew Margaret Vale. When? Years ago. Before your marriage? Yes. Did you know she was alive? Lady Fane hesitated. Yes. Where is she? I don't know. Edward laughed. You always lie. Wimsey looked at him. You've been searching for her. Yes. Why? Because she knows the truth about my father. Sir Alfred. Edward shook his head. No. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Then who? My real father. Silence. Edward continued. My mother told me one thing before she disappeared. What? That my father was not the man everyone believed. Wimsey looked toward the portrait gallery. Sir Alfred Fane? No. Then Henry? Edward laughed bitterly. Henry was my brother. Parker frowned. But you said, my half-brother. Wimsey's thoughts moved quickly. Then the birth records were altered. By whom? Edward looked at Lady Fane. Her. Lady Fane recoiled. No, you changed them. I was a child. You were 17. I was frightened. Of Henry? Of your mother? Edward went silent. Wimsey observed them both. There was a story here, but it was not yet the story of the murder. That distinction mattered. He turned to Parker. Charles, search the West Wing. For what? The original household records. Parker nodded. Edward looked at Wimsey. You won't find them. Why? Because Henry destroyed them. Then why murder him? Edward's eyes hardened. I didn't. Who did? I came here to ask him one question. What question? Edward reached inside his coat. Parker immediately raised his revolver. Edward slowly withdrew a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Wimsey. On it was a single sentence. The man you are looking for is not the man you think he is. Wimsey read it twice. Where did you get this? It was in Henry's pocket. Parker frowned. When? After I found him. You said you didn't see him after 4. I lied. Why? Because I knew you would accuse me. You're quite right. Edward looked at Wimsey. But there is something else. What? When I found Henry, he was already dead. And the clock? Stopped at 4:17. Yes, Edward shook his head. The clock was already stopped when I entered. Wimsey became very still. At what time? 3:50. Parker stared. Impossible. Edward looked at him. That's what I thought. Wimsey walked to the mantel. The clock still showed 4:17. He removed it from its stand. Behind it was a tiny smear of blood. Not Henry's, someone else's. Wimsey examined it. Then he looked at Edward. Where were you at 3:50? In the garden. Alone? No. Who was with you? Edward hesitated. My mother. Wimsey turned toward the door. But Margaret Vale was supposed to be hidden beneath the nursery. Edward looked confused. She was never beneath the nursery. A silence followed. Then Wimsey smiled very slowly. Ah. Parker stared at him. What? We have just found the first real lie. Whose? Wimsey looked at Edward. Everyone's. He placed the clock on the desk. The question is no longer whether Edward Vale killed Henry Fane. He looked at the stopped hands. It is who wanted us to believe that Henry died at 4:17. Outside, the library bell rang once. Then, from the wall behind the fireplace, came the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock. The sound of the key turning came again, slowly, deliberately. Then there was a click from behind the fireplace. Lady Fane stepped backward. Edward Vale stared at the stonework. Parker raised his revolver. Wimsey, meanwhile, appeared almost pleased. My dear Charles, he said, put that thing away. Why? Because if the person behind the wall intended to shoot us, I imagine he would have chosen a more conventional entrance. The stone panel moved. A narrow opening appeared. Cold air entered the library. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then a figure stepped through. It was Miss Prentice. She closed the panel behind her and stood with her hands folded. Parker lowered his revolver. Housekeeper, inspector. Wimsey looked at her. You have a habit of appearing from walls. I have lived in this house for 32 years. Then I suppose you know where the sensible doors are. She ignored him. Her eyes went to Edward. He stared at her with open hostility. You lied to them, he said. I told them what they needed to know. You told them my mother was hiding beneath the nursery. Miss Prentice's face remained expressionless. I told them she had been there. Was she? Yes. When? Earlier. Edward took a step toward her. Where is she now? Miss Prentice looked at Wimsey. Safe. From whom? From you. Edward laughed. You still think I am the danger? No. Her voice was quiet. I think you are the consequence. Wimsey glanced between them. Excellent. We are now speaking in riddles. I was beginning to fear the investigation might become straightforward. Parker turned to Miss Prentice. Enough. Tell us exactly what happened. She looked at the stopped clock. Dr. Fane was alive at 3:50. Edward nodded. I told you, Miss Prentice continued. He was not alive at 4:17. Parker stared at her. Then when did he die? At approximately 4. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Approximately. Yes. Who was with him? No one. Edward spoke. That isn't true. Miss Prentice looked at him. You were not in the library. I was outside it. Where? On the terrace. Then you could not see what happened. I heard the argument. Between whom? Edward hesitated. Henry and Lady Fane. Lady Fane closed her eyes. Wimsey turned toward her. You were with Dr. Fane? Yes. At what time? Shortly after 3:30. What happened? He told me he knew about Margaret. And? He accused me of hiding her. Were you? Yes. Why? Because Henry wanted her dead. Edward stepped forward. Why? Lady Fane looked at him. Because she knew what he had done. What had he done? Lady Fane's voice broke. Your father. Edward stared. My father. Henry killed him. No. Yes. You said Alfred Fane was his father. He wasn't. Edward looked at Wimsey. The detective remained silent. Lady Fane continued. Henry believed Alfred would expose him. He had discovered that Henry was not his son. Henry panicked and killed him. Yes, but why hide it for 32 years? Because I was there. Parker frowned. You? Lady Fane nodded. I saw Henry push him. The room seemed to shrink. Wimsey looked at the clock. Then why did you not tell anyone? I was 17. Fear. Yes. Blackmail? Yes. By Henry? Yes. What did he threaten? To expose Margaret. Edward's face changed. Expose her for what? Lady Fane looked at him. She had given birth to you. I know. No, you don't. Lady Fane's hands trembled. You were not Edward Vale's child. Edward went completely still. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. Then whose child was he? Lady Fane looked at him. Henry Fane's. Edward stared. No. Yes, you're lying. I wish I were. Edward stepped backward. Wimsey watched him carefully. Then the entire family history was fabricated. Lady Fane nodded. Henry discovered the truth about his own birth. He was Sir Alfred's adopted son. Margaret was his biological mother. Parker looked confused. Then Edward was Henry's son? Yes. And Margaret was Henry's mother? Yes. The words landed with such ugliness that nobody immediately answered. Wimsey finally spoke. That makes the photograph rather more interesting. He crossed to the portrait gallery and returned with the photograph they had found. The three figures stood frozen beneath the faded glass. Sir Alfred, Henry, Margaret. Look carefully, Wimsey said. Edward took it. His expression changed. Henry is standing beside her. Yes, like a son. Exactly. But why is Edward absent? Because the photograph was taken before you were born. Edward looked at Lady Fane. You knew. Yes. And you changed the records. Yes. Why? To protect you. Edward's voice became bitter. You protected me by making me believe my own father was dead? I protected you from Henry. A silence followed. Wimsey interrupted. And Henry discovered the alteration? Lady Fane nodded. Years later. What did he do? He used it. How? He threatened Margaret. For money? No. Then what? Lady Fane looked toward the fireplace. He wanted the silver key. Wimsey touched the box. What does it open? The family archive. Why would Henry want it? Because it contains the original birth records. Parker frowned. Then why hasn't anyone simply destroyed them? Because they were never kept here. Where? Lady Fane pointed toward the wall. Behind the fireplace. Wimsey smiled. We have already been there. No. She shook her head. Not behind the first panel. There's another? Yes. She approached the fireplace. Her fingers found a narrow groove beneath the stone mantel. She pressed it. Nothing happened. She looked at Wimsey. The silver key. Wimsey produced it. He inserted it. The lock turned. A deeper mechanism moved within the wall. A section of stone slid sideways. Behind it was a narrow compartment. Inside lay several bundles of papers tied with black ribbon. Wimsey removed the first. The label read, Household Records, 1919. The second, Private Correspondence, Sir Alfred Fane. The third, Birth Register, Confidential. Parker exhaled. So that's what all this was about. No, said Wimsey. Everyone looked at him. He held the third bundle. This is what someone wanted us to think it was about. He untied the ribbon. The first document was a birth certificate. The name of the child had been removed, but the date remained, November 17th, 1919. Wimsey looked at Lady Fane. That's the date of the 17th bell. She nodded. No. Wimsey frowned. No? The bell has nothing to do with the date. Then what does 17 mean? Lady Fane hesitated. The 17th room. Parker stared. What 17th room? The house has 17 rooms listed in the original plans. Wimsey's eyes moved toward the corridor. Only 16 exist now. Yes. Where is the 17th? Lady Fane pointed downward. Beneath the west tower. Wimsey's expression became thoughtful. The tower where Sir Alfred died. Yes. Parker looked at him. Then that's where we go. Wimsey shook his head. Not yet. Why? Because somebody has been remarkably eager to lead us there. He looked at the documents. First the silver key, then the bell, then the hidden nursery, then the photograph, now the missing room. Parker frowned. You think it's a trap? I think it is too carefully arranged not to be. Edward spoke quietly. Then why would the murderer want us to find it? Because he knows we cannot resist. Wimsey picked up the birth register. There was one final document beneath it, a death certificate. The name was Margaret Vale. The date of death was listed as November 17th, 1919. Edward stared at it. But she's alive. Yes. Wimsey turned the page. The signature belonged to the attending physician, Dr. Henry Fane. Parker looked at him. He forged her death certificate, apparently. Lady Fane began to tremble. Wimsey looked closer. Something was wrong. The certificate was too clean, too well preserved. The ink was not 32 years old. He touched the signature. Charles. What? This was written recently. Parker examined it. How can you tell? The ink. Wimsey held the document toward the lamp. Old ink penetrates the fibers. This sits on the surface. So someone forged the certificate recently. Yes. When? Wimsey looked at the stopped clock. Today. Edward's face hardened. Who? Wimsey turned to Miss Prentice. She had gone very still. Perhaps, he said, the person who knew Margaret was still alive. Miss Prentice said nothing. Parker stepped toward her. Where is she? The housekeeper looked at Wimsey, then at Edward. Finally she whispered. She went to the west tower. Edward immediately moved toward the door. Wimsey caught his arm. No, let go. If you go there now, you may be walking precisely where someone wants you to walk. My mother is there, and the murderer knows that. Edward stopped. Wimsey looked at Parker. We need the original plans. Parker nodded. Where? The estate office. Miss Prentice answered. Burned. When? This afternoon. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. After Dr. Fane died. Yes? Who ordered it? Dr. Fane. When? Yesterday. Wimsey smiled faintly. Of course. Parker stared at him. What? Henry knew the plans would expose the hidden room. Then why destroy them? Because he didn't. Wimsey lifted the burned edge of a document from the fireplace. He wanted us to believe he did. He turned the fragment over. On its reverse was a drawing, a staircase, a tower, and beneath it written in pencil, Room 17, access from library. Wimsey looked toward the fireplace, then toward the corridor, then at the silver key. The room isn't beneath the tower. Parker frowned. Then where? Wimsey smiled. It's behind us. He turned. The library wall stood silent and solid, but the 17th bell had begun ringing again. Once, twice, 3 times. Wimsey counted under his breath. 4, 5, 6. The bell continued. Parker stared. Peter, how many times is it going to ring? 17. Why? Because someone has just opened room 17. The 17th ring sounded. At that precise moment, every clock in Ashcombe Hall began striking. But only one clock struck the correct time. And it was not the clock in the library. It was the small clock in the servants' passage. Its hands pointed to 3:50. Wimsey looked at it, then at Parker. Now we know when Henry Fane died. Parker's face tightened. 3:50. No. Wimsey shook his head. Now we know when someone wanted us to think he died. He turned toward the hidden doorway. The real murder occurred earlier. From somewhere behind the wall came a woman's scream, then silence. Wimsey's expression became cold. Now, he said, we may go and find the truth. The scream had ceased before Wimsey reached the wall. That was in itself reassuring. A continuing scream suggested panic. A sudden silence suggested that somebody had acquired a reason for not screaming. Charles, said Wimsey, I think we ought to hurry. They crossed the library. The hidden panel behind the fireplace stood open. Beyond it was darkness. Parker took a lamp from the desk. Stay behind me. My dear fellow, if I stayed behind you, I'd miss everything. They entered. The passage was narrow and sloped slightly downward. At the end stood a wooden door. There was no handle, only a small silver keyhole. Wimsey held up the key marked with the letter F. It fitted. He turned it. Nothing happened. He tried the other key, the one marked M. The lock clicked. The door opened. Beyond it was a room unlike any other part of Ashcombe Hall. It was circular. The walls were covered with old portraits and maps. Shelves contained ledgers, letters, boxes, and carefully labeled bundles of documents. A single lamp burned on a table, and beside it stood Margaret Vale. She was holding a revolver. Parker raised his own weapon. "Put it down." Margaret laughed softly. "I have no intention of shooting anyone." "Then put it down." She lowered the revolver onto the table. Wimsey looked around. Room 17. Yes. Hidden for 32 years. Yes. Why? Because Henry feared what was kept here, which was the truth. Wimsey glanced at the shelves. An ambitious word. Margaret looked at him. "You don't believe me." "I believe that people use the word truth when they mean whatever happens to be inconvenient." She smiled. "Your reputation is deserved." "I'm sorry to hear it." Parker moved toward her. "Where is Lady Fane?" Margaret's face changed. "She was here." "Where is she now?" "She left." "With whom?" Margaret hesitated. "Edward." Wimsey looked at the doorway. "When?" "Minutes ago." "Which direction?" "Toward the tower." Parker cursed. "I told you it was a trap." Wimsey did not respond. He was examining the table. There were 3 objects upon it: the silver box, a blood-stained handkerchief, and a small brass clock. The clock showed 3:50. Wimsey touched it. "Interesting." Margaret watched him. "That was Henry's." "Why keep it here?" "He used it to measure time." "Why?" "Because the clocks in this house were deliberately altered." Wimsey looked up. "By whom?" "Henry." "Why?" "To construct alibis." Parker stepped closer. "For himself?" "Yes." "Explain." Margaret pointed toward the brass clock. "Henry knew the house clocks were synchronized from the main mechanism. He altered that mechanism years ago. So the clocks were wrong. By 17 minutes. Wimsey smiled. "Of course." Parker looked confused. "But the library clock showed 4:17. "Yes." "And the servant's clock showed 3:50. "Because the servant's clock was never connected to the mechanism." Wimsey nodded. "So the house clocks were designed to lie." "Exactly." Parker looked at Wimsey. "Then the time of death was earlier than we thought." Margaret interrupted. 3:32. Wimsey looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because I was there." "Again?" "Yes." "What happened?" Margaret sat down. "Henry was writing when I entered the library." "When?" 3:25. "Why?" "He had summoned me." "For what purpose?" "To confess." "Confess to what?" "Everything." Wimsey's expression became attentive. "Go on." "He told me he had murdered Alfred." "We already knew that." "No." Margaret shook her head. "He told me he had murdered someone else." Parker leaned forward. "Who?" "Edward." Silence. Wimsey's voice was quiet. "Edward is alive." "Not the Edward you know." Parker frowned. Margaret continued. "The boy I knew as Edward Vale died in 1927. Wimsey stared. "Then who is the man calling himself Edward Vale?" "I don't know." "You expect us to believe that?" "I expect you to investigate." Wimsey looked at her. "You're saying the man in the photograph died 9 years after the events of 1919? "Yes." "And the present Edward is someone else?" "Yes." "Then why would he know about the family?" "Because Henry told him." "When?" "Recently." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "Then the present Edward was working with Henry?" Margaret shook her head. "Against him." "Why?" "Because Henry had been blackmailing him." "With what?" Margaret looked toward the shelves. "His identity." Wimsey walked along the shelves. He examined the labels. One read, VALE, 1920, 1930. Another, FANE, private. Another, medical, confidential. He stopped at the last. "May I?" Margaret nodded. Inside were medical records. Wimsey opened the first file. The name was Henry Fane. The second was Lady Fane. The third was Edward Vale. The fourth had no name. Wimsey opened it. Inside was a photograph. A young man, the same face as Edward. But the date was different. Wimsey stared. Parker leaned over. "That's him." "Yes. But if the photograph is genuine, he was alive in 1938. And Margaret says he died in 1927. Wimsey looked at her. "Who died in 1927? "The real Edward." "Then who is this?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't know." Wimsey returned the photograph. "Now we have reached the interesting part." Parker looked exasperated. "Peter, I have been thinking murder was the interesting part. Murder is usually the least interesting part. He turned toward Margaret. Where did Henry get this photograph? I don't know. Who took it? I don't know. Why was it hidden? I don't know. Wimsey smiled. Excellent. Margaret frowned. Why excellent? Because we have finally reached the boundary between what you know and what you want us to believe. Her expression hardened. I am telling you the truth. Perhaps. He picked up the blood-stained handkerchief. This is Henry's blood. No. Whose? I don't know. Wimsey examined the initials embroidered in one corner. E.M. Edwin March. Margaret nodded. He was injured. Where? In the library. When? After Henry died. Then why is his blood here? He came back. For what? The key. Wimsey looked at the silver box. What key? The one that opens the tower. There is another? Yes. Where? Margaret pointed toward the ceiling. Edward has it. Parker immediately moved toward the door. We're going after him. Wimsey stopped him. Not yet. Why? Because we have not asked the most important question. What? Wimsey turned to Margaret. Why did Henry need the tower? Margaret's face became grim. Because that is where Alfred kept the original will. Parker stared. The inheritance? Yes. Who inherits Ashcombe Hall? Margaret looked at him. Not Lady Fane. Wimsey nodded slowly. Edward? No. She shook her head. Elizabeth? Lady Fane? Yes. But if she was not Alfred's daughter, she was. Wimsey became very still. Margaret continued. Henry altered. Final Unes. The birth records because he wanted the estate. So Lady Fane was the legitimate heir? Yes. And Edward? Nothing. Parker frowned. Then why would Edward care about the will? Because he believed it contained the name of his real father. Wimsey's expression changed. That explains everything. Parker looked at him. Does it? Almost. He turned toward the door. The murder was never about money. Margaret shook her head. No. It was about identity. Yes. Henry discovered who Edward really was. Yes. And someone killed him before he could reveal it. Margaret looked down. Yes. Who? She whispered. Edward. Parker stared. But you just said. I said the man calling himself Edward killed him. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Not the Edward who died in 1927. Margaret nodded. The other one. Parker looked baffled. Who is the other one? Margaret's voice became barely audible. Henry's son. Silence. Wimsey slowly turned toward the door. Then Lady Fane is not the only child whose identity was concealed. No. Who is Henry's son? Margaret looked toward the tower. I don't know. Wimsey's eyes rested on the brass clock. 3:50. He suddenly picked it up. There was something engraved on its underside. A single word. M.A. Chi. Wimsey smiled. Edwin March. Parker's face tightened. You think March is Henry's son? I think we have been given enough clues to suspect it. Then we arrest him. No. Why not? Because if March is Henry's son, he is not necessarily the murderer. Parker stared. After all this? Yes. Wimsey walked toward the doorway. Someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to make us believe March killed Henry. Because he is innocent. Perhaps. Then who? Wimsey stopped. He looked back at the room, at the hidden records, the blood-stained handkerchief, the brass clock, the silver box, then at Margaret. Where was Henry when you last saw him? In the library. What time? 3:32. Alive? Yes. Who entered afterward? Margaret's eyes filled with fear. One person. Who? She looked toward the door. The person Henry trusted most. Wimsey waited. Margaret whispered, Lady Fane. Parker shook his head, but she told us she was there. Yes, and admitted arguing with him. Yes. Then why hide it? Because she wasn't alone. Wimsey's eyes sharpened. Who was with her? Margaret looked at him. Her son. Parker stared. Lady Fane has a son. Margaret nodded. Not officially. Wimsey's face became expressionless. Then we have another hidden child. A noise came from above. 3 rapid knocks. Then 1. Then 3 again. Wimsey looked at the ceiling. That's a signal. From whom? I don't know. Margaret suddenly stood. I do. Who? She looked terrified. Henry. Wimsey shook his head. Henry is dead. No. Margaret pointed toward the floor. The knocking is coming from the tower. Wimsey listened. 3 knocks. 1, 3. He understood. Not Henry. He looked at Parker. Someone is trapped. Parker drew his revolver. Then we'd better rescue them. Wimsey picked up the silver key. No. He smiled faintly. First we find out who locked them in. The knocking came again. 3, 1, 3. Then silence. Wimsey stood motionless in the center of room 17, listening with the peculiar concentration of a man who has just discovered that a house may possess a language of its own. Parker looked at him. It's coming from the tower. Yes. Then let's get there. In a moment. Peter, Charles, if someone is locked inside a room, the first question is not how to get him out. What is it then? Who locked him in? Parker sighed. I knew you were going to say that. Then I am becoming predictable. Wimsey returned to the table. The brass clock still showed 3:50. He turned it over. The word March was engraved beneath it. But there was something else. A tiny scratch crossed the final letter. He held it beneath the lamp. The scratch was deliberate, not March. M-A-R. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. He rubbed the surface with his thumb. A layer of grime came away. Beneath it was another letter. K. Parker looked over his shoulder. March K. No. Wimsey smiled faintly. March K. What does that mean? It means somebody wanted us to read the wrong name. He looked again. The inscription was not March. It was Mark. Parker stared. Mark? Apparently. Who is Mark? That is what we shall discover. Margaret Vale stepped forward. I know that name. Both men turned. Who is he? Wimsey asked. Margaret looked toward the ceiling. Henry's first son. Parker stared. Another son? Yes. Where is he? Dead. Wimsey's expression remained calm. Everyone in this family appears to have died at least twice. Margaret did not smile. Mark was born in 1918, before Henry's supposed son Edward. Yes. Who was his mother? Margaret hesitated. Elizabeth. Wimsey looked sharply at her. Lady Fane. No, her mother. Parker frowned. Then Mark was Henry's half-brother. Wimsey nodded slowly. Henry's father was Alfred Fane. Henry himself was Margaret's son. Mark was born to Alfred and another woman. Who? Margaret's eyes lowered. Agnes March. Parker looked at the clock. March. Yes. So Mark was a Fane by blood, but carried his mother's name. Exactly. Wimsey's gaze returned to the inscription. Then someone named March may not have been Edwin at all. Margaret said nothing. A sudden thud came from above. Parker looked up. That's enough. He moved toward the passage. Wimsey followed. They climbed the narrow staircase and emerged in the library. The hidden panel remained open. The corridor beyond was empty. The house had become unnaturally quiet. Wimsey stopped beside the library clock. Its hands remained fixed at 4:17. He examined the face, then the back, then the mechanism. Broken, he said. Parker looked at him. That's obvious. No. The interesting thing is how it is broken. Wimsey pointed. A tiny brass lever inside the mechanism had been bent backward. Someone stopped the clock manually, so the 4:17 time was staged. Yes. And the servant's clock. Never altered. So 3:50 was real? Not necessarily. Parker groaned. You're going to tell me that we still don't know the time. We know something better. What? When the clock was stopped. How? Wimsey pointed to the brass lever. A smear of blood. Parker leaned closer. The blood was dark and nearly dry. Whose? Not Fane's. March? Possibly. Then March stopped it. Perhaps. Peter. Wimsey smiled. I know. You want an answer. I want one that survives 5 minutes. That is an excellent ambition. He examined the smear again. It is on the inside of the mechanism. Parker frowned. So whoever stopped the clock had to open its back. Yes. And they had blood on their fingers. Yes. Which means the injury happened before the clock was stopped. Parker's expression changed. The blood on March's handkerchief. Exactly. But March said he was injured after finding Fane. which would mean his story is false. Then he is our man. Not quite. Why? Because if March had stopped the clock after killing Fane, why leave his blood on the mechanism? Parker stared. Wimsey continued, unless he wanted us to find it. Parker looked at the blood. So it's another planted clue. Possibly. You're making me dizzy. Then sit down. Parker did not. Instead, he pointed toward the corridor. Listen. Footsteps. Someone was walking slowly across the floor above them. Wimsey raised a finger. The footsteps stopped. Then came 3 knocks. 1, 3. Parker looked toward the ceiling. Again. Wimsey nodded. The signal. From the tower. Yes. They moved toward the west wing. The corridor narrowed as they approached the tower. A heavy oak door stood at the end. It was locked. Parker tried the handle. Nothing. Wimsey examined the lock. Recently used. By whom? The person who locked it. Can your key open it? Wimsey tried the silver key. It did not fit. He tried the second. Again nothing. Parker looked at him. Wonderful. Wimsey looked down. There was a third keyhole, much smaller. He smiled. Of course what? 3 keys. He searched his pockets. The first silver key, the second, nothing else. Then he remembered the brass disc from the box. He took it out. The disc fitted perfectly into the third opening. He turned it. The lock released. Parker stared. That isn't a key. No. Then what is it? A key pretending to be a coin. The door opened. A spiral staircase rose into darkness. They climbed. Halfway up, Wimsey stopped. There was blood on the stone. Fresh. Parker touched it. Still wet. Wimsey looked upward. Then whoever was injured came this way recently. They continued. At the top was a small circular room beneath the tower roof. A man lay against the wall. Edward Vale. His hands were bound. Blood covered one sleeve. Parker hurried toward him. Are you all right? Edward opened his eyes. Not particularly. Who did this? Edward looked at Wimsey. Your friend. Which friend? Lady Fane. Parker stared. Wimsey crouched. Tell me exactly what happened. Edward breathed painfully. She came to the tower. When? Minutes ago. Alone? No. Who was with her? Edward shook his head. I never saw his face. What happened? She had the key. Which key? The one from the box. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. The tower key? Yes. Where is it? Edward laughed weakly. Gone. Who took it? The man who attacked me. Describe him. Tall. Age? 40. Perhaps 50. Clothing? Dark coat. Anything distinctive? Edward closed his eyes. A silver cufflink. Wimsey's gaze dropped to Edward's sleeve. You have one. Edward looked down. A silver cufflink remained attached to his cuff. It bore no initial. Parker noticed something on the floor. A second cufflink. He picked it up. It bore the letter V. Vale. Edward stared. That isn't mine. Wimsey took it. Of course it isn't. Parker frowned. Why? Because the person who attacked Edward wanted us to think it was. Edward struggled to sit upright. Lady Fane knows where the room is. Room 17? Yes. Why did she bring you here? To show me something. What? Edward swallowed. A body. Silence. Parker stared at him. What body? Mark. Wimsey's expression changed. Mark March? Edward nodded. His body has been hidden in this tower for years. Parker looked toward the dark staircase. That is impossible. Edward laughed bitterly. Not in this house. Wimsey stood. Where? Edward pointed upward. The old bell chamber. They climbed another flight. At the top was a circular chamber filled with ropes, gears, and dust. A massive bell hung above them. The mechanism was ancient but intact. Wimsey examined the ropes. One was newly polished. He followed it downward. It led through the floor. This is the bell mechanism. Edward nodded. Someone has been operating it. From here. No. Then where? Edward pointed toward the wall. Below. Wimsey found another hidden panel. Behind it was a narrow shaft. A second rope disappeared downward. He understood. The 17th bell was not being rung from the servants' passage. No. It was being rung from here. Yes. Why 17? Edward looked at him. Because Mark died at 17 minutes past 3. Wimsey stared. Parker whispered. Then the bell wasn't telling us a date. No, it was telling us a time. Exactly. Wimsey looked at the clock mechanism. The house clocks had been altered to make 4:17 appear significant, but the bell had been signaling something else. 3:17, not 4:17. A deliberate distinction. Wimsey moved toward the bell. At its base lay a scrap of cloth. He picked it up. Black silk. Lady Fane's dress was black. He looked at Edward. Did she wear this? Yes. Parker swore. Then she was here. She was. And Mark's body. Edward nodded toward a wooden trapdoor. Below. Wimsey opened it. A foul smell rose from the darkness. Parker covered his mouth. They lowered the lamp. A human hand lay beneath the boards. Wimsey's expression became grim. Not Mark. Parker looked at him. How do you know? Because the hand is wearing a wedding ring. Edward stared. That isn't Mark. Wimsey looked down into the darkness. Then whose body is it? No one answered. He lowered the lamp farther. The face emerged from the shadows. Parker recoiled. Edward went white. Wimsey did not move. The corpse was Dr. Henry Fane. But that was impossible. Henry Fane's body was still lying in the library. Parker whispered. Peter. Wimsey looked from the corpse below to the corridor beyond. Then he smiled, not with amusement, with understanding. Now, he said quietly, we have finally reached the trick. He turned toward Edward. Tell me one thing. What? When you found Henry in the library? Edward stared. Yes? Did you actually see his face? Edward's expression slowly changed. No. Wimsey nodded. Then we have never seen the real victim. A sound came from below. 3 knocks. 1, 3. Then a woman's voice rose from the darkness. Too late, Lord Peter. Wimsey looked down. The corpse's eyes were open, and someone beneath the trapdoor began to laugh. The laughter came again. It was not loud. That made it worse. It rose from somewhere beneath the trapdoor in a thin, breathless chuckle, stopped abruptly, and then began again. Parker drew his revolver. Who is down there? No answer. Wimsey remained beside the opening. His attention was fixed upon the corpse. The face was undoubtedly Henry Fane's. The same narrow forehead, the same heavy eyebrows, the same distinctive scar beside the left ear, the same gold wedding ring, and yet Henry Fane was dead in the library. Parker whispered, there cannot be 2 of him. Quite right. Then one of them isn't Henry. Also quite right. Edward Vale stared into the darkness. That man is Henry. Wimsey turned. You are certain? Yes. How? Edward swallowed. The scar. Anyone could reproduce a scar. Not that one. Why? Because I gave it to him. Wimsey's eyebrows rose. That is a remarkably unpleasant family tradition. Edward looked sick. When I was a boy, he struck my mother. I threw a bottle at him. It broke against his head. Then you remember the scar? Yes. Wimsey looked again at the corpse. Very well. He lowered the lamp. The corpse's face remained motionless. Parker crouched beside it. There's no doubt about the body. Not yet. What do you mean? Wimsey pointed toward the hand. The wedding ring. Parker examined it. Fane's initials. No. Parker frowned. Wimsey removed his glove. The initials are AF. Parker stared. But Fane was HF. Exactly. He turned the ring over. The engraving had been worn almost smooth, but 2 letters remained. AF. Alfred Fane. Edward stepped backward. My grandfather. Apparently. Parker looked at the corpse. Then this isn't Henry. No, it's Alfred? Almost certainly. But Alfred died 32 years ago. Which is why we should refrain from announcing the discovery until we have established what precisely we have discovered. A voice came from below. You always were fond of unnecessary caution. Wimsey looked down. A figure stood beneath the trapdoor. Lady Fane. She held a lantern. Her black dress was torn at the sleeve. Blood stained one cuff. Edward stared at her. You. She looked at him. I warned you not to follow me. You attacked me. No. You left me tied up. I found you tied up. Then who did it? Lady Fane looked at Wimsey. The man you are looking for. Wimsey smiled faintly. That narrows it down considerably. She climbed the ladder. Parker helped her up. Where were you? In the lower passage. With whom? No one. Why was Edward here? He followed me. Why? Because he wanted answers. Edward laughed bitterly. And you intended to give them? Yes. What happened? Lady Fane looked at Wimsey. I found the body. Whose? Alfred. Edward shook his head. Alfred died in 1920. Yes. Then how is he here? Lady Fane looked toward the corpse. That is the question Henry spent 32 years trying to answer. Wimsey became very still. Henry knew about this. Body? Yes. When? From the beginning. Then why did he pretend Alfred had died elsewhere? Because he had to. Why? Because Alfred was not the man who died. Parker looked exasperated. I am beginning to feel that every answer in this house creates 3 more questions. Wimsey smiled. Welcome to Ashcombe. Lady Fane knelt beside the corpse. She touched the man's sleeve. Look, Wimsey crouched beside her. There was a small tear near the shoulder. Underneath was a fragment of cloth. Lady Fane removed it. That's from Alfred's old military coat. Wimsey examined it. Old? Very. He rubbed the fabric between his fingers. Too old. Lady Fane looked at him. What do you mean? This body has been here for decades. Parker stared. Then why does it look so fresh? Wimsey pointed to the surrounding chamber. The temperature. The tower chamber was cold. The walls were thick stone. A draft moved continuously through a ventilation shaft. Natural preservation, he said. Parker looked disgusted. Good Lord. Nature is occasionally more economical than science. Edward approached. If that's Alfred, then where is Henry? Wimsey looked at him. Precisely. Lady Fane closed her eyes. I know. Where? In the library. Wimsey's expression became grave. Then there are 2 bodies. Yes. And one of them is Henry. Yes. And the other is Alfred. Yes. Parker looked from one to the other. Then Henry did not die 32 years ago. Lady Fane shook her head. No. He killed Alfred. Yes. Then concealed the body. Yes. And lived until today. Yes. Parker stared at Wimsey. But why would anyone make us believe Henry had been dead for years? Wimsey answered quietly. Because someone needed Alfred to remain dead. Lady Fane looked at him. You understand. I am beginning to. He stood. Henry discovered the body was still here. Yes. And he discovered that Alfred's death had been falsified. Yes. By whom? Lady Fane said nothing. Wimsey looked at her. You. Her face tightened. I was 17. You helped Henry. I had no choice. You helped him hide the body. Yes. And you helped create the false history. Yes. Why? To protect Margaret. From Alfred? No. From Henry? Yes. Wimsey paused. Then Henry was blackmailing everyone with the same secret. Lady Fane nodded. He knew about the body. He knew about Margaret. He knew about the altered records. He knew about the children. And he intended to reveal everything. Unless he was paid. Money. No. What did he want? Lady Fane looked toward Edward, his son. Edward went pale. Me. He wanted you to become his heir. That makes no sense. It does if Henry believed you were useful. Wimsey interrupted. Useful for what? Lady Fane hesitated. Political influence, money, the estate. He had built an entire network around the false family history. Then why kill him? I didn't. Who did? Lady Fane looked at the floor. Mark. Wimsey's expression sharpened. Mark March. Yes, but Mark is dead. Lady Fane nodded. He was supposed to be. Edward stared. What does that mean? It means Henry arranged his death. Why? Because Mark discovered the truth. Which truth? That Alfred had another son. Mark. Yes, and Henry killed him. Lady Fane nodded, or tried to. Wimsey looked at the corpse. Then Mark survived. Yes, and returned. Yes. Today? Yes. Parker frowned. Where is he? Lady Fane looked toward the passage. He was the man who attacked Edward. Edward suddenly understood. The silver cufflink. Lady Fane nodded. Mark wears his mother's initials. V. No. She looked at Wimsey. Vale. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Mark March became Edwin March. Silence. Parker's face changed. Then Edwin March is Mark. Yes. Edward stared. He's been here the entire time. He came back for revenge. Wimsey shook his head. Not revenge. Lady Fane looked at him. Then what? Proof. What proof? That Henry murdered Alfred. Wimsey returned to the corpse. He examined the ring again, then the coat, then the hand. Something caught his eye. A small black mark beneath the fingernail. He scraped it gently with the tip of his penknife. A dark residue came away. Lamp black. Parker looked at him. From the tower. No. Wimsey examined it. From a fireplace. Lady Fane's face changed. The library. Exactly. He looked toward the staircase. Alfred's body was moved. When? Lady Fane stared. I don't know, Wimsey thought. The corpse has been preserved here for decades, but the lamp black is recent, so someone moved it. Yes. Who? Wimsey looked at the blood on Lady Fane's sleeve. Not you. She looked startled. How do you know? The blood is on the outside of your sleeve, not the inside. You touched someone who was already bleeding. Edward spoke. Mark. Probably. He was injured. Yes. And he moved the body. Not alone. Lady Fane looked at Wimsey. Then who helped him? Wimsey's gaze moved toward Edward. Edward immediately shook his head. Not me. No. Then who? Wimsey looked toward the dark stairwell. The person who had access to the library after 3:32. Parker frowned. Lady Fane. She was there. Yes. Then no. Wimsey shook his head. She left before the murder. Lady Fane stared. How do you know? Because she told us something without realizing it. What? She said Henry was writing when she entered. So, the ink on Henry's pen was still wet when the body was discovered. Parker's expression changed. How does that help? It means Henry was writing immediately before he died. Wimsey paused. And Lady Fane was not there when he was killed. Then who was? Wimsey looked at Edward. Who entered after her? Edward swallowed. Mark. Did you see him? No. Did you hear him? Yes. What did he say? Edward hesitated. He said Henry had lied. About what? I don't know. Wimsey turned toward the library. We have to go back. Parker looked at the corpse. What about Alfred? Leave him. Leave him. Yes. Peter, we can't just... We can. He has been waiting 32 years. Another few minutes will not offend him. They began descending. At the bottom, Wimsey stopped. Charles. Parker turned. What? Look at the dust. A second set of footprints crossed the floor. Fresh. They led toward the hidden passage. Parker crouched. One person? No. Wimsey pointed. There are two. One set belonged to boots. The other was smaller. A woman's shoe. Lady Fane looked down. Her face went white. I wasn't with anyone. I know. Wimsey followed the footprints. They stopped at the wall. No door. No opening. He touched the stone. There's a mechanism. Parker searched. Nothing. Wimsey looked at the floor. A loose stone. He moved it. Beneath was a small metal lever. He pulled it. The wall opened. Beyond was a narrow corridor. At the far end stood Edwin March. He held a pistol. Beside him stood Margaret Vale. And between them was Henry Fane. Alive. Parker raised his weapon. Wimsey held up a hand. Henry smiled. Good evening, Lord Peter. Wimsey looked at him for several seconds. Then he glanced at the empty passage behind them. Doctor. Yes? You have been remarkably difficult to kill. Henry laughed. I have no intention of dying. Unfortunately, said Wimsey, that is not entirely your decision. Henry's smile faded. Margaret stood beside him trembling. Edward stepped forward. You're alive. Henry looked at him. Of course. You were never in the library. No. Then whose body is it? Henry's expression became cold. My father's. Wimsey nodded. Alfred Fane. Yes. And you arranged for us to find it. Yes. Why? Henry looked toward Margaret. Because after 32 years, I wanted the truth to come out. Wimsey studied him. Then why kill yourself? Henry smiled. I didn't. Exactly. The detective looked at Parker. The body in the library isn't Henry. Parker's eyes widened. No. Wimsey continued. And the body in the tower isn't Henry either. Henry's smile vanished. Wimsey's voice remained quiet. There is only one genuine murder victim. He looked directly at Henry. Mark March. Henry said nothing. Wimsey took one final step forward. And you have just made your fatal mistake. Henry's face tightened. What mistake? You told me Mark was dead. A silence followed. Wimsey smiled. Yet you were the only person who could know that. Henry's eyes flickered. For the first time he looked afraid.